Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Webb. I am giving a video class for today, Monday, October 22nd, because, as I mentioned on Friday, 7 of you are on field exercises right now and will not return until Tuesday. And those 7 are the students that consistently attend class, and frankly, over the last few classes, have been the only 7 to show up for class. So instead of coming to a class where I am almost certain no one will show up for tomorrow, I am putting class online instead. I have also had a personal event happen this weekend, which is the other reason why I am doing a video class this morning. So it fulfills both your needs and mine. I may or may not do another video class for this Friday, October 26th, but if I do, I will let you know in class on Wednesday. So to continue our lesson, we're finishing off the rhetorical devices that we have been going over for the past few days. Next, the next rhetorical device that we want to go into more in depth is repetition. Repetition is a literary device that repeats the same words or phrases a few times to make an idea clearer and more memorable. There are several types of repetition commonly used in both prose and poetry. As a rhetorical device, it could be a word, a phrase, or a full sentence, or a line in a poem repeated to emphasize the word or phrase's significance in the entire text. Repetition is not distinguished solely as figure of speech, but more as a rhetorical device. Now, there are multiple types of repetition. In fact, there are 11. There are 11 types of repetition that you might want to know. First, and they are classified according to the different types, both in literature and daily conversations. First, we have anadipolis. Anadipolis. Anadiplosis. Again, that's Anadiplosis. Anadipolis. That is a repetition of the last word in a line or clause. Next, we have anaphora. Anaphora is Anaphora. Again, that's Anaphora. An anaphora is repetition of words at the start of clauses or verses. And again, going back to things like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, then when they were enumerating King George's violations, they said he did this, and he did this, and he did this. That would be anaphora. Next, we have antistasis. 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 Anastasis. That is repetition of words or phrases in opposite sense. And opposite sense is just what it sounds like. It is for, something like, it was hot or it was not. It was, that type of, juxtaposition. Next, we have diacope. And diacope is Diacope. Again, Diacope. COPE. And diacope is repetition of words broken by some other words. It's such as, I'm trying to make this up. Uh, the Corvette is green, the Corvette is fast, the Corvette is cool, the Corvette, is awesome. And again, you're repeating the word Corvette over and over, but it's broken by other words. Next, we have epanalepsis. That's EPANALEPSIS. Epanalepsis. Again, EPANALEPSIS. Epanalepsis. And that is the repetition of the same words at the beginning and end of a sentence. And a good example of that is I heard, quote, "What is it?" he said. I then heard, "Where is it?" he said. I then heard, "Who is it?" he said. Beginning and end of a sentence. And next we have epimone. And epimone is EPIMONE. EPIMONE. And that's the repetition of a phrase, which is usually a question, to stress a point. And a good example of this is politics, where someone will be up on a podium saying, "Well, has the current president done this? Has the current president done this? No, he has not. He has done this, this, this. But has he done this? He has not." But over and over again. Next, we have epiphora. And epiphora, EPIPHORA, again, that's EPIPHORA, that is the repetition of the same word at the end of each clause. For instance, the dog was brown, the dog was happy, and the dog was fat. And of all these things, the dog was fuzzy. The dog got up, the dog ate the food, the dog played with a bone, then it played with something else, and at the end of the day, the dog was fuzzy. And over at the end, was fuzzy at the end of the same clause. Next, we have gradatio, and that is GRADATIO. Again, it's GRADATIO. Gradatio. And that is the construction. Well, that's in poetry. You're not going to really come across it. You might come across it if there's some excerpts in your readings. But construction in poetry where the last word of one clause becomes the first of the next, and so on. And again, we're probably not going to see that, but I just wanted you to know that it exists. Next, we have the negative positive restatement. And the negative positive restatement is the repetition of an idea first in the negative terms and then in the positive terms. For instance, it is terrible that we don't have cake. But it's wonderful we don't have cake, so we don't have the calories. I don't know. It's hard to think of these examples off the top of my head in quick succession like this. But it's the repetition of an idea, first in negative terms, then in positive terms. Such as, oh, I can't believe that happened. And yet this is what happened. Something like that. Next we have polyptoton. Polyptoton. That's POLYPTOTON. POLYPTOTON. And polyptoton is the repetition of words of the same root with different endings. And that's like saying epigastric, ep, EpiPen. I'm sorry, these are medical terms. Parenthesis, paragraph, parent, and parakeet is a better one. Next, and finally, the 11th, we have Symplose. It looks like Symplose. It's Symploce. Again, that's Symploce. And that's an M as in Massachusetts. Sym. And that's the combination of anaphora and epiphora, in which repetition is both at the end and at the beginning. For instance, the dog was angry, bared its teeth, and growled at the brown fur. The dog then barked and whined and sniffed at the brown fur, and over. Now, short examples of repetition is if you think you can do it, you can do it. And the boy was a good footballer, his father was a good footballer, and his grandfather was a good footballer. Now, the function of repetition. The function of repetition, it is for refrain, and refrain is a poetic device and is the most important function that a refrain may serve in poetry is to, or prose, is to lay emphasis and create rhythm. You can create rhythm and you can create emphasis in a paragraph. It doesn't have to be um, a poem itself. Sometimes really good writers actually sometimes will write paragraphs that almost sound like poetry, and that's determined by the rhyme and the length of the words and the sentences and such. So when a line or phrase recurs in a poem or a piece of literature, it becomes noticeable to the readers. By using refrain, poets can make their ideas memorable and draw the attention of readers toward a certain idea. This is done by using a single line recurrently throughout a work, allowing readers to take a pause each time they come to such repetition. And I'm sure we can all think of a repetition that comes off the top of our heads and shows how strong repetition can be. And I, of course, refer to Green Eggs and Ham. I would not, could not with a fox. I could not, would not in a box. I could not, would not on a train. I could not, would on a plane. I mean, you're all late teens, early 20s. You haven't, I'm assuming you haven't read that book in 15 years or more, yet you all remember the line. And that's the power of repetition. Finally, and this is the final rhetorical device. I'm sorry, it's not. It's the second, we have two more. We have rhetorical question, and then we have sarcasm. The next one we have is rhetorical question. And rhetorical question is asked just for the effect, or to give emphasis to some point being discussed when no real answer is expected. Kind of like anything that I may say as a question here, because this is a recording, and clearly you cannot reply to a recording in real time. A rhetorical question may have an obvious answer, but the questioner asks it to lay emphasis to the point. In literature, a rhetorical question is self-evident and is used for style as an impressive, persuasive device, such as, again, in the Federalist Papers or the Declaration, things of like, has the king done this, or does he really care? No, he does not, and things of that nature. Broadly speaking, a rhetorical question is asked when a questioner himself knows the answer already, or an answer is not actually demanded. So, an answer is not expected from the audience. So such a question is used to emphasize a point or draw the audience's attention. Such as, For instance, let's see. Oh, like who knows? Actually, I'm sorry. They do have some common rhetorical questions here, and such as who knows, or are you stupid, or didn't you hear me, or why not, or are you okay? When generally someone can tell whether someone's bleeding or not. They could, so you're probably okay. Rhetorical questions seem to be a basic need of daily language, and the examples that I just gave, I'm sure you've heard many times in your daily life. Now, mostly it's easy to spot a rhetorical question because of its position in the sentence. It occurs immediately after a comment is made and states the opposite of that comment. The idea, again, is to make the point more obvious. Some rhetorical questions are as follows. Keep in mind that they're also called tag questions because they're tagged at the end of the sentence. Example is, it's hot today, isn't it? And the actors act well, don't they? I mean, again, you're looking for confirmation. You're not exactly looking for actually asking the question or whether or not it is hot. Because if someone does give the answer in the negative to a rhetorical question, you go to another one, and that rhetorical question is, "Are you stupid?" from the original example. Now, the function of rhetorical questions. Writers employ rhetorical questions for rhetorical effects, and we cannot easily quantify the impact rendered by a rhetorical question. The idea becomes more powerful, and our interest is aroused to continue to read and enjoy the technical and aesthetic beauty that a rhetorical question generates. Moreover, it is a requirement in persuasive speeches. Now they do say that. Okay, it says it's a requirement in persuasive speeches. I would agree with that 95% of the time. There are cases, the small cases, 5%, where you can be persuaded of something when you don't necessarily need to ask a rhetorical question. It's a good flair, but you can be persuaded of something without necessarily requiring a rhetorical question. For instance, if I if I try to convince you that the sun is out, I don't know. I would say, okay, look at the sky, look at that big bright thing over there. That is called the sun. Therefore, we know the sun is out. You don't always need a rhetorical question, but they're pretty good. They're pretty good to have. It's kind of like it's like salt, I suppose. Salt, it enhances the flavor of the food, but if you cook it right, or the argument, if you cook it right, or you structure it right, you don't strictly need salt per se, and salt being the rhetorical question. All right, but again, it's very good to use. All right, now finally, and I really do mean finally this time, we are going to go into the definition of sarcasm. Sarcasm is the last item on the list. And sarcasm is derived from the French word sarcasmor and the Greek sarkasian, which means to tear flesh or to grind the teeth. Somehow, in simple words, it means to speak bitterly. Generally, the literal meaning is different than what the speaker intends to say when using sarcasm, or the speaker or the writer. The actual meaning is different than the words. Sarcasm is a literary and rhetorical device that is meant to mock, often with satirical or ironic remarks, with a purpose to amuse and hurt someone, or some section of society simultaneously. For instance, and this is a quote from Mark Twain, "I didn't attend the funeral, but I sent a nice letter saying I approved of it." Now that's very biting and tears flesh, such, and is very bitter. I didn't attend the funeral, but I approved of it, meaning he's happy the person died, which is never a good thing. Next, we have 7 types of sarcasm. Sarcasm often depends on the tone, and here's the 7 types that lead to different tones, or they feed into one another, really. First is self-deprecating sarcasm. Again, self-deprecating sarcasm. This category of sarcasm expresses an overstated sense of inferiority and worthlessness. Like, "Oh yeah, well, what do I know?" Like, "Oh, I don't think you should have punched the lieutenant colonel, but what do I know?" Next, we have brooding sarcasm. In this criticism, the speaker utters something polite. However, the tone of his speech has marked bitterness, just like the Mark Twain quote. "It seems very polite. I didn't attend, but I sent a nice letter saying I approved." It seems very polite, but it's actually quite bitter that he's happy the person died. Next, we have deadpan sarcasm. Uh, Deadpan, deadpan. And deadpan sarcasm is expressed without emotion or laughter, making it difficult for the listener to judge whether the speaker is joking or mocking. Uh, and sometimes it can be a little more obvious. For instance, um, if I were to come to class one day wearing a leotard, and I say, "Oh, hey, how does this look? It's my new thing. It's my new fashion. Oh yeah, hey, how do you think I look? This middle-aged fat white dude in a leotard." And if somebody said, "Oh, looks great," that's deadpan sarcasm. So without emotion or laughter, it's just, "Yeah, great." And usually there's an inflection in the voice that can give it away. Next, we have polite sarcasm. And a speaker or writer is said to have delivered a polite sarcasm when his listeners only get to realize that his kind remark was sarcastic after they gave it some thought. And basically, it's not as obvious as the uh, the brooding sarcasm. For instance, if I said, you know, oh gee, I'm trying to think of something a polite sarcasm. If I said to a student, "Well, um, your unique writing was exceptional. I truly have no words to describe it." That could be sarcasm if I mean to say that the writing was extremely poor and I could not state how poor it was. So, but that's something you have to think about a bit. Next, we have obnoxious sarcasm. And obnoxious sarcasm is the kind that makes people feel like punching the speaker in the face. It's not very funny and it gets under the skin. So basically, sarcasm done without any finesse or any real grace or ability. Uh, and I guess a good example of obnoxious sarcasm is any sort of sarcasm used in elementary school between students, because little kids, they don't have a complete grasp on things yet, they and such, so they try to use it but it doesn't come out right. So I'm guessing they would have the most obnoxious sarcasm, and the only other evidence would be the amount of little tiffs and fistfights that go on across elementary schools, you know. Anyway. Next, number 6, we have manic sarcasm. And manic sarcasm is delivered in an unnaturally happy mood, which makes the speaker look like he has gone crazy. Um, this is hard, if not impossible, to really convey in writing, which is your main work in this class. But again, you could convey manic sarcasm if you choose in your rhetoric assignment, but I wouldn't advise it, frankly. But I guess for manic sarcasm, here's a good one. There was an old episode of The Simpsons where something, I don't remember exactly what was going on, but Homer, uh, something about Marge said, "Oh, well, at least you have the joy of making people happy," and Homer had no gain, no financial gain. And he goes, "Oh, look at me! I'm making people happy. I come from a la la land where there's rainbows and So when he he was a little unhinged. That, oh, look at me! I'm so happy." So that could be a good, or a example of or an example of manic sarcasm. Finally, we have raging sarcasm. And raging sarcasm is the kind that relies mainly on exaggeration and violent threats. And a good example of raging sarcasm, a toned down version of raging sarcasm is, I'm sure you've heard people say something like this, more like, "Oh, I'm going to hit you so hard, your grandkids are going to feel it." Stuff like that. Um, and that's kind of a cliche, kind of a almost silly, because it's cliche, sarcastic remark. I don't even know if that's sarcastic, really. Um, I really can't think of I can't quite think of something that would be both a violent threat and sarcastic in the fact that it means the opposite of what you're saying. But then again, I'm not a very violent guy. So I guess I can't give you a really decent example of raging sarcasm. Oh, okay. Well, oh, okay. Well, maybe something like, "Oh, well, I'm not gonna hit you. I'll just make sure." No, I can't even think of, like, "Oh, I'm not gonna hit you. I won't kill you. I'll just bury you." I'm like Edgar Allan Poe type thing. I don't know. I really that doesn't. I don't think that really fits the definition either. Well, again, I don't think you're going to need raging sarcasm in this class for any reason, so I don't think we really need to go into it. All right, finally, the function of sarcasm. Sarcasm can be used for many purposes. However, in most cases, it's utilized as a mask or a scathe. Scathe, scathing, something to hurt. Others use it as a defensive mechanism. It's used when bitterness is hard to express in a pleasant way. Excuse me, or the objective is to say something without hurting someone directly. The basic purpose of sarcasm in literary works is to bring a flavor in order to make the stories seem real to the readers. And again, it is sarcasm and rhetorical question. They're like salt. Again, these are things that bring a flavor. Now, you don't want to overuse it, because if you overuse it, just like salt, you'll hide the flavor of the piece, or either the food or the thing you're writing, and it just becomes too difficult to take. So, okay, well, actually, I'm going to give you this class in 2 parts. This is the first part. It's a half an hour. The second part is going to be the next 15 to 20 minutes, but I'm going to cut off the video here because I am actually doing things at the moment at the same time I'm recording this class. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to restart, and you will watch both videos in order to complete this class. All right, I will begin again very shortly. Thank you, and please continue on to part 2, which is the beginning of your MLA lesson that we're going to continue for this week.